V'yomim Moshe el Aaron. Moshe said to Aaron, Krav el Mizbeach. Aaron was chosen to be the Kohen Gadol, and Moshe explained to him exactly what korbanos, what sacrifices he needs to qualify him to represent Klal Yisrael. He had to bring a chatos and olah on his own behalf, and then a chatos and olah on behalf of Klal Yisrael. So he says to Aaron, his brother, Krav el Mizbeach, come close to the Mizbeach. V'asei es chatoscha v'solasecho, and do your sin offering and your burnt offering. V'chaper ba'adcho u'ba'ad. And then you'll be qualified, when you're atoned for yourself, you'll be able to atone on behalf of Klal Yisrael. V'asei es korban ha'om v'chaper b'dam. And then you will do the korban of the people, and you will atone on their behalf, kashetziv Hashem, as Hashem has commanded. It seems to be some words here which are superfluous. Because he says to him, you will do your chatos and olah, v'chaper ba'adcho ba'adom, and you will atone for yourself and on behalf of the people. Then it says, and then v'asei es korban om, then you will do the korban of the people, v'chaper ba'adam. Seems to be totally redundant. He already said you will atone for yourself and on behalf of the people. So the atonement already was spoken, and he says, and then you will do the korban of the people, v'chaper ba'adam, and you will atone for them. Kashetziv Hashem. So I think what the Torah, the first mention of you will atone for the people, means only once you atone for yourself, then you're qualified to atone for the people. And once you're qualified, then you will do the korban on behalf of the people and bring about atonement on their behalf, a proper atonement. It's cited as a takeoff of this concept that when we do our Torah Nedorim before Rosh Hashanah, that it's best that the Bezdin, the panel who sits and responds to bring about the nullification of the Nedorim, the vows and the oaths, that the panel they themselves already had their vows annulled. So the Bezdin themselves are already in a position to annul vows because they themselves have no vows upon themselves, and there's no claim against them that they actually violated their Nedorim or their oaths. Similar to this concept, that you only could bring about a result only if you yourself are not so-called guilty or liable, culpable for whatever the person who's coming before you to bring about that result. It's really, nobody conducts himself that way, but it's like it's a takeoff of this, that who's qualified to atone? Only the person himself who has atoned for himself. So that's v'chaper ba'adcho ba'adom. First atone for yourself, and then you qualify to atone on their behalf. And then you will do the korban ha'om v'chaper ba'adam and bring about kapor on their behalf. Okay, but that's not what I want to speak about. I want to speak about Rashi. Rashi says it's a Torah Kohanim. Krav el Mizbeach. He says to Aaron, come close to the Mizbeach. Shoya Aaron bosh v'yori lo geshes. Aaron was embarrassed, and he was afraid to approach the Mizbeach to officiate. Now, firstly, why was he embarrassed? Because again, Aaron himself, although his intent was not that chas v'sholom klal should do idolatry, but it was a delay tactic that maybe by stalling them, he built the Mizbeach, he gathered the stones, he didn't have them do it jointly. Then he says, and you will give your gold, and he thought since they'd be hesitant, they withhold the gold, this would delay it sufficiently, but factually it didn't. And not only that, there's a midrash. The midrash says that there were two people who of the group of the rabble from Egypt who were known sorcerers, and the moment the gold was thrown into the kiln, through sorcery, the golden calf came out of the kiln. That's the midrash. So Aaron didn't realize how quickly, unfortunately, this happened. That was his failing. So he felt, nevertheless, since he was an accomplice to something which was initially unforgivable, which actually brought Klal Yisrael back to post-sin, as we discussed many times, After Klal said Nasa v'nishma, and we heard the Aseret Dibros, we reverted back to pre-sin of Adam, and we would have lived eternally. Only because of the Chet Egel did we revert back to post-sin, and therefore death has relevance to us. And any Chil Hashem that ever takes place, any sin till the end of time, is due to the Chet Egel. Aaron was a participant in that. As a result of it, Aaron felt he was unworthy, and therefore he was bosh, he was embarrassed, and he was afraid. The fear went not to a physical fear, meaning as a result of his level of reverence for Hashem, he was afraid to approach, because his level of unworthiness caused that sense of fear. So what does Moshe say to him? Omalo Moshe, lama tabosh. Why are you embarrassed? Lekach nivcharto. For that you were chosen. We have to understand what this means. Why are you embarrassed? He should say, why are you embarrassed? Why is he embarrassed? He should be embarrassed, right? A person sins, you have to do tshuva. So part of tshuva, as the Rabbeinu Yonah says, a more advanced qualitative tshuva is that not only do you have remorse, but the remorse is so deep that you're ashamed of yourself that you crossed that line. So what is he, Lama Tabosh? Why are you embarrassed? Of course you should be embarrassed. You may be qualified, but of course you should be embarrassed. Lama Tabosh lekach nivcharto. He should have says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose you. I mean, if Hashem chose you, so that's the reason why you're supposed to officiate, regardless of how you believe that you're unqualified. So what he says, no, for that reason, you were chosen. Because you were embarrassed, that's why you were chosen. Okay? How do we understand that? We mentioned the Gemara in Avodah Zarah says, why did Aaron do the Chet Egel? Why did he participate? We find the last mention of Hur, who was the son of Miriam, was when Klal Yisrael went to battle against Amalek. It says that Moshe was praying, Aaron held up one hand, Hur held up the other hand. And as Moshe raised his hands, the Jews were victorious. As he lowered his hands, they had some setbacks in battle. That's the last mention of Hur. Hur is not mentioned any longer. What happened to Hur? So Gemara tells us that initially when the rabble introduced the concept of the Egel, Hur protested, and he was killed. They killed him. Hur gave his life for Kiddush Hashem, not to allow this tragedy to take place. Aaron himself should have done the same. That was the claim against Aaron. Aaron, as your nephew, gave his life, you should have given your life. You should have participated. There's no justification. So the Gemara says, what was his justification? What was his rationale? That because Aaron was a Novi and a Kohen, he had both of these special levels of status. If Klal Yisrael kills a Kohen and Novi, the sin is unatonable. It will never be forgiven. So Aaron said, better, I should put myself in the position and take a chance as a delay tactic and forfeit my world to come. Even to forfeit my world to come, and Klal Yisrael should be in a position, even if they do idolatry, they'll be forgiven. Because if they should kill me, they will never be forgiven. Avodah Zarah, idolatry, they'll be forgiven. But for killing a Novi and a Kohen, they will never be forgiven. That was the wrong thing. That was the chet. That was the sin. If God says you're not permitted, you don't get involved in God's calculations. Who's worthy, who's forgivable, what is, what's not. That was the failing of Aaron. Aaron should have given his life as his nephew gave his life. That was the claim against Aaron. Because factually, through him came a Chil Hashem, and you shouldn't participated, although that initially you didn't believe it would happen, but since it could happen, you shouldn't have been involved. That's the Gemara in Avodah Zarah. Okay? Now, when there was nobody who supplicated Hashem on behalf of Klal Yisrael as Moshe Rabbeinu. Never. Whether it was the Chet Egel, whether it was the Chet Meraglim, where God says, I will destroy them, Moshe went there and supplicated at a level nobody ever prayed and was advocated for Klal Yisrael, like Moshe Rabbeinu. Why? Why was Moshe Rabbeinu the ultimate advocate for Klal Yisrael? Why? For what reason? So the way I understand it, Moshe Rabbeinu was Onav Mikol Adam. There's no more special Jew than Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu did not have a trace of self. He lived purely for God's glory, for Kovod Shamayim, only for that. What is the basis for Kavod Shemayim? Klal Yisrael. If there's no Jewish people, there's no Kavod Shemayim. Bereshis Bara Elokim, the objective of creation is there's a Torah, and the Torah only has relevance to Klal Yisrael. If Klal Yisrael, Chas v'Sholem, should not exist, there is no Kavod Shemayim. And no one internalized and lived through that more than Moshe Rabbeinu. Therefore, there's no greater advocate than Moshe Rabbeinu. On behalf of Klal Yisrael. He was the greatest. So why was he such an advocate? Because selflessly, of his level of commitment to Hashem, Klal Yisrael was the vehicle for that Kavod Shemayim. What about a person has to be an advocate of someone? And he has to be selflessly committed for that person. And he feels that person, he shouldn't have done what he did. And because of that, somehow, it causes a level of interference and doesn't let him fully supplicate it as he should. He's not a proper advocate. You have to be in a position as if it would be your own situation. We say, Al Toras Chavero Ad Shenagilam Kobo. Don't pass judgment on your fellow until you stand in his place. Because no one understands the challenges of another person. But if you put yourself in the other person's place and you understand and you're able to somehow understand the rationale why a person fails, therefore you'll go to bat for that person and you'll supplicate to the nth degree on that person, on his behalf. But if you feel he shouldn't have, that may interfere with your level of being the proper advocate. Now, Aaron is the ultimate advocate of Klal Yisrael. He's the officiant to bring the korban and to pray for the forgiveness of the person he's bringing the korban. The whole concept of kapora is only if it's predicated on tshuva. The Gemara says in a number of places, Kohanim ochlim ubayim miskaprim. When the Kohen eats the korban, not only when he officiates, when he eats the korban, that is part of the atonement process for the person on whose behalf the korban is being brought. If Aaron himself felt that the person shouldn't have done what he did, even though it was a state of inadvertency, or there was a rationalization, justification, if he felt it's unacceptable, he's not the proper representative of that person. So why is Aaron Bosh? He says, Lama to Bosh. Why are you embarrassed? Because he realized afterwards that his justification was not a justification. He should have allowed himself to be killed. Meaning he rationalized, and only afterwards he realized that it was wrong what he did. Because he was in that position to appreciate that every person rationalizes, and that is the basis. Even when it does something deliberate, there's always a certain rationalization. That makes you the most qualified advocate, representative, to represent every person, because every person rationalizes when he does the wrong thing. Therefore, he says to him, Lo matabosh, l'kach nivcharto. Why are you embarrassed? Hashem chose you, so forget it. He says, no, you don't stand because you are embarrassed. That's why you were chosen. Therefore, you're the proper advocate that you could put yourself in the position of every person you represent to understand that there's a basis to rationalize. Therefore, you can go to bat fully on behalf of that person that you're representing. Alan, what do you say?
I say a lot of things.
Okay, I'm listening.